Hi, I'm Susan Colby. I'm the Director of Faculty Development. I'm going to walk you through an assessment plan for one of my master's level courses. I'd like to just mention that this all is based on a backwards design model where you start with your course goal. You design the large, authentic, project-based, summative assessment that will show students have learned the course material for that goal. And then you break it down into formative assessments that are a little bit more informal, and they help scaffold students as they work themselves to the final product. For my course, it's a master's course. It's called Recent Trends and Issues in Education, and I teach it to master's students that are practicing teachers out in public schools. And the major goal of the course is that over the course of the semester, they'll really examine factors that affect quality and equity in all educational systems, and that would be local to global. This particular learning goal goes with my service learning component, and teachers will support and advocate for underserved and marginalized student populations in their school. The summative assessment is a very large community-based partnership project. This is one of two assessments, summative assessments, that I use in this course. So it's a very large course, so you work on it throughout the entire semester. This is what the summative assessment would look like. Of course, there's many more pages, but they actually really have to think about one particular issue in education, like food insecurity, students with disabilities, all sorts of different kinds of issues that they might face as teachers in schools. And then they write a full paper which has various components in it. So the aligned formative assessments that go with that would be 4 in this particular instance. They start with a literature review, and they look at all the literature in the field. If they're in a school with a high percentage of students that face food insecurity, then they would do a lit review on food insecurity and how that affects students, and really look at how that works in the schooling environment. They would also, a second formative assessment as we're working along this larger project, is they're going to research community-based organizations that might alleviate, help support food insecurity in children and families, and then in particular, how does that relate to a school? The third kind of formative assessment that we would do along the way, which actually will then show up in the summative assessment, is they're going to develop and implement a community service plan, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then finally, at the end of doing all of these 3 large components that take a good bit of time, they actually are going to spend some real quality time reflecting on what they've learned and what the implications are for them as teacher leaders in their school, and how they can advocate for these populations and support these populations. So I'm going to focus in on just one formative assessment, which is developing and implementing that community service plan. Because now you're going to watch me move from the idea that these are formative assessments, and I am looking at them and grading them informally, and how that turns into the instructional strategies now that I would use in my course to make sure that students can show success on these assessments. So again, with that same formative assessment, and after they've done the literature review, really done a lot of work researching organizations, I have them develop and implement a community service plan. I'm very structured about how they do this. The first thing they have to do is actually interview the director or parents or students that might be utilizing or leading this particular organization, and they ask very focused questions, because again, we're trying to get after what is the impact on students, how does this particular organization support their well-being, and what does this mean for me as a public school teacher. So they're going to devise the exact questions that they're going to interview directors with, etc., to get some background information. Then they're going to think about a plan for specific observations that they will do within this organization that will help them better understand the goals of the organization, how it works with its clienteles, and the things that are benefits to either the families, the students, or the community. At that point, some other kinds of learning experiences I will have in my course is bringing students together, all of my master teachers that are out implementing these community service plans, and having a series of discussions about how they're choosing their topics, how they're going to interview and what kind of questions they might ask, what they're learning from their interviews, what they're learning from their observations. So these are some of the learning experiences that I would have actually take place in my course, whether it's hybrid or online. And last, just for this community service plan piece, they're going to do a reflection. And this reflection will become part of the larger reflection after they've gone back to look at the lit review, research on the community organizations, this particular plan that they've implemented, and what they've learned from it. Because my final goal is that in that final reflection that they're they can actually look at themselves, see what they've learned, and hopefully find themselves as advocates for these marginalized populations and how to support. They'll have a full resource, a documentation full of resources from these particular organizations as well. So I would grade this summative assessment. I would use the As You Learn assignment tool, and I would use the rubric. That helps me become more efficient, and it also gives them the opportunity to look at the grading criteria before they even start the project and use it along the way. And if you looked at my course, this is what you would see. Basically, for any assignment, I would have an instructor video. I would have the guidelines, the rubric. I usually have a page or half a page of resources that they can use to help make sure their product is high quality. I also give models of students from previous semesters if it's applicable. For most of the kind of projects I do, it's pretty much impossible to plagiarize because they're really based on context. You can also see that I have a discussion forum for question and answer just on this assignment. And I also have a discussion forum where they can put in a piece of their assignment and get feedback, and others can also see what that looks like and learn from their teammates. And then, of course, the submission link. Some of the things that I do that can be adapted either face-to-face or hybrid or online would be that I'm very clear about my expectations. I always have an assignment video where I explain the assignment and I scroll through the guidelines so that they understand exactly what's needed. I make sure that there's enough in writing for them, that the guidelines are clear, that they have all the sections clearly identified and they understand the different components. I do actually always have a question and answer discussion forum to go with just that assignment, especially if there's only 2 summatives in my entire course. And I usually have an optional synchronous Q&A session where students at the beginning of the semester can join me synchronously on Zoom, and I'll answer any questions about that assignment. This is very helpful as they're choosing their topics and getting started. I'm also very careful that my feedback can work in any of these course delivery options, and that would be that I have periodic check-ins with students along the way. I provide a lot of models. They actually turn in different sections of this assignment over time and get feedback. So they might turn in their literature review first. I might ask some very pointed questions, and then they move throughout that. That way they can use my feedback, and I feel like my time and energy spent on giving them feedback is much more beneficial to them. I also always ask them after they've turned in their series of formatives and they're building up to their summative, for them to then look again one more time at the rubric and self-evaluate. This is a great place for them to kind of catch what's missing and kind of think about whether or not where they're at in terms of the rubric and their own quality work. And then, of course, once I grade them, I use the rubric. That helps provide feedback, and then also it gives me the opportunity to build in a comment here and there as appropriate. So those are some of the ways that I try to have aligned assessments in my course and kind of really try to help scaffold student learning so they're successful on that capstone assignment. Thanks.